Hello, welcome back to our Object Relations lecture series. Today I'd like to talk about a topic that is so profoundly pervasive as a pathology, and it's eating disorders, and it affects our culture, it affects so many people, and it affects people's health all the time if they have an eating disorder. So the subject of eating disorder is a serious topic, and it's very different than somebody just being concerned about if they feel like they're a little overweight and they would like to lose weight. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are obsessed with food all the time and obsessed about whether they eat it, how much they eat it. There are people who try to get control of all their emotional needs through substituting physical food and either being insatiable for it or depriving themselves of it to prove that they can be above needing altogether. So I'm going to break down a few different types. We have the now commonly known bulimic personality, who swallows foods and vomits it up, overeats and then vomits it up to partly not to gain weight, but also really out of psychological factors that we need to go into. The anorexic is someone who generally feels very helpless and out of control of their emotional needs and of their lives, and they try to gain a sense of defensive control by controlling their bodies and not eating, and depriving themselves sometimes of food to such an extent they have to be hospitalized, sometimes even die, from trying to be superior by showing that they don't have a need for food, which is really an unconscious statement that they are denying they have any emotional needs as human beings, because they feel they would never felt those needs were responded to adequately in early stages of mothering, and then they try to master the needs by not having them. But it gets converted into physical things. You know, just like some people can substitute buying things for emotional needs that they have for contact and connection and intimacy and relatedness with others. They can substitute things to buy. Well, people who have eating disorders substitute a physical thing too, but it's food, and they're obsessed with the type of food they eat, and sometimes they don't even remember it, but they're obsessed with what they think they want to eat or what they're not going to eat if they're anorexic, to be above it. And the effects of the anorexic and bulimic condition can destroy one person's life, but it also affects their families, their children, their spouses, and it really, if not treated psychologically and understood in its psychological factors, it can just physically destroy a life, literally, like in the anorexic who dies, or it can destroy emotional relationships and therefore family relationships. The anorexic, as I said, is someone who tries to be above. Now, I've worked with people who in the past have been seriously anorexic to the point almost of killing themselves or being in major depressions where they couldn't be there for a child, a husband, or family. One particular woman, when I worked with her, was at a very different phase where she was healing and she was able to eat normally, but it had taken years. She had really had this narcissistic, grandiose belief that she could do without food. She would cook for a family and not eat a thing. And then she would become this arrogant, hostile person who thought she was superior and arrogantly acted out all over, and so she pushed people away, and she couldn't be there for emotional needs of her child. years later in treatment with me, she grieved and grieved. The fear of what she had done, the loss of what she had done was profound, and she grieved it over a number of years on the couch in really deep treatment. And this helped heal her and heal her ability to deal with her family. And her child had gotten into treatment. Now with this other woman, she had a bulimic condition, and when she was actively physically bulimic, it's like bulimia is like when an anorexic deprives themselves of food, they're saying, I don't need mommy, because food represents mommy. It's like, I deny my needs because my mother was never there for me in the way I needed her emotionally, so I deny I have any, and I'll be above it by not eating. The bulimic has this mixture of a mother who was either too much there for them, but if they were more separate and had more autonomy, which they need to separate in the second year of life when separation, individuation takes place, and then over time to be separate in their own person, the mother couldn't deal with this, felt then like too much, even though that could have felt like a good mother when the mother was so nurturing when they were in a state of wanting to be more merged with the mother and more dependent on the mother. So a bulimic person will develop from this oscillation of the mother who is too much there or withdraws, like usually particularly around separation and autonomy being expressed by the child. And then food is used to act out this insatiable hunger for mommy. At the same time, then mommy becomes toxic inside because the mother becomes bad in a state of separation. Then the bad mother comes up and then they spew out the food. So it's not just about not wanting to put on weight that they vomit up the food. It's also that mommy becomes toxic inside because the internal bad mother takes over. And then they have to vomit her out. And this goes on in the transference with the therapist. For those of you who knew the word transference, it's experienced in relation to the therapist that they become dependent on too. And this person who was bulimic physically, when she removed herself from the country of origin where her mother lived, she actually stopped being physically bulimic. She would be eating before all these cakes and then vomiting. When she removed herself, she no longer was physically bulimic, but in treatment with me, she became expressive more of the emotional bulimia, insatiable hunger, which she experienced both physically and emotionally. She said one day coming into treatment, I was on the street, I bought a hot dog, and then I felt like I needed more and more hot dogs, and I'd be insatiable for hot dogs, and then I thought I needed more and more and more sessions, and she actually was in intensive psychoanalysis. She was coming for 2 double sessions a week, another single session, actually 5 sessions a week. But when she thought of all these hot dogs, she thought, I want more and more and more sessions. It's never going to be enough. I need 9 sessions a week. No, even that feels like it won't be enough. So the same thing that went on with the physical bulimic began on emotionally, the idea of just needing and needing. And it was like a void inside that she had to fill with food or with, now it wasn't acted out with food. She didn't literally eat like that anymore. But then it was, I need you, the therapist who became the transferential mommy. I need you so much I can't get enough of you. But then she would have to get away, and that would be like the vomiting of, and she'd sometimes sit up on the couch with this kind of sense that she wanted to throw up because she felt like she had taken me in so much that she couldn't bear it, and she'd then want to puke. So the emotional enactment went on in treatment. Simultaneously, she would do compulsive spending outside the treatment that she said was a substitute for the physical bulimia. And she would buy things insatiably the way she used to eat cakes insatiably. And then she wouldn't use any of the things. She wanted to get rid of them because it reminded her of her bad behavior in her mind, that she couldn't control herself, and she just had to spend money she didn't have and buy more things. So these were midway points to later when she really resolved it. She, through feeling all the losses of her life, going back to the primal loss with the mother and going through all the rage at the mother who wouldn't let her separate and yet was overbearing in needing her when she needed her own autonomy, the rage becoming conscious rather than being kept unconscious, then she was no longer filled up with such hyperkinetic, manic energy because the rage could be expressed in her therapy hours and she could articulate and understand what was behind it, which was hunger, but hunger that goes way back to the second year of life when her mother pulled away from her during separation. And hunger that going to go back to a merged state of being a baby before this disruption with the mother happened. And then she would feel insatiably hungry for me. But she would also feel she would want to puke and throw up because it became too much when she was insatiable, and she could never get what she needed that way. What she did get with me was the relatedness of my being with her when she was in these profound feeling states of loss and rage, and then she got to understand her past and how it was living in the present, and she could then own her emotional needs because they became normal levels of emotional needing in relationship and no longer just insatiability. Now, there are many people also just tremendously overeating, and we hear about all their health problems, diabetes in children, really early stuff that in children, and it's not talked about in terms of the lack of appropriate mothering, which involves separation and allowing separation, autonomy, not just giving. It's mothering that's attuned to the developmental needs, both for connection and for separation, and for different stages of relationship as the child ages. So all of this about eating disorders comes back to our psychological understanding, and it's not just about helping people plan better eating regimes. That can be important, but it's certainly not about diets, because that's just like the starvation, the anorexic, and then it's undone. And it's like a bulimia. You diet and then you starve yourself for a while and then you gorge yourself after that. That's like a bulimic dynamic. So diets don't work. But what does work is really changing eating habits when the person is no longer obsessed with food and they have other things in their lives through relationships and creativity that fulfill them because they've processed their rage and loss, as we do in therapy. Then they have other interests in the world, and then they're no longer constantly thinking about food. And then they're really getting past the eating disorder. And so every person can think about, do I eat when I'm hungry, or do I eat out of emotional needs? That's if those of us who might sometimes eat just because we're emotionally hungry, that's something to look at as a milder form of what I'm talking about. But then there are people with these real serious eating disorders. The best situation is when we eat when we're hungry, and when we've had enough, we know how to end and not be constantly thinking about food. And then we can move on to other interests within relationships and within developing our creative talents.